Welcome to the Gut Show. I'm Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Gutivate, and I will be your host. My goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their guts better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season of the Gut Show, you can expect a weekly conversation covering a hot topic related to health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I'm not your personal dietitian. Everything we cover in this episode is meant to be educational and not a substitute for personalized care from your healthcare team. Welcome, and let's dive into today's episode. What if you could enjoy your FODMAP trigger foods again without the symptoms? FODzyme can help. FODzyme is the world's first enzyme supplement specialized to target FODMAPs. When sprinkled on or mixed with high FODMAP meals, FODzyme's novel patent-pending enzyme blend helps break down lactose, GOS, and fructan, helping you savor every single bite. So if fructans, GOS, or lactose are among your FODMAP triggers and you want to try FODzyme out for yourself, go to fodzyme.com and use our code GUTSHOW to save 20% off your order. That's FODZYME.com and code GUTSHOW for 20% off. Now let's jump into today's episode. Welcome back to the Gut Show for our final episode of season 5. I've been so thrilled with this season so far, and I appreciate you tuning in for every episode and joining me as we kind of explore some of these less talked about, semi-controversial topics around IBS and gut health. We're closing down the season with a talk about picky eating, which is definitely less controversial, but I feel like it's something that isn't addressed head on when it comes to digestive disorders, and even the development of certain food fears and kind of the complexities that are going on there. I think, before we get into addressing picky eating, oftentimes when it comes to IBS, there's more of a conversation on the back end of, oh, you're just being picky, or like you need to try more foods. And while yes, you probably should and might benefit from trying new foods, it's not always that simple, right? Because a lot of the food fears are rooted in symptoms, and even the avoidance or the restriction that's involved is to control symptoms and care for the gut. So there's a lot of complexity there. But this conversation is hopefully going to unmask a different layer to the conversation in a safe place, because this is not meant to say, oh, you're just being picky, because that's not true. It's also supposed to kind of open up a thought around where picky eating does come from. Because if you are just being picky, what if you are? Well, why, right? That's the piece that's often missed is, without judgment, let's explore why there may be pickiness involved and what we can do about it. I also want to explore pickiness as the root to some of the problems that are going on and what this could actually be telling you about your body. Because if this isn't being talked about, I've seen with so many people that this is a piece of the puzzle that can be easily missed. So let's dive into all of that in this conversation. And then, as always, I want to hear from you too. And I'm excited to see what you took away or what thoughts you have by the end of the episode. So as always, let's start with the definition of picky eating. This is the tendency to be highly selective or restrictive about the foods that one is willing to eat, simply put. In a more severe scale, think of this kind of on a spectrum. In a severe scale, this can actually be a phobia, and it can be called food neophobia, which is the unwillingness to eat certain foods. This may involve avoiding selective food groups. This may look like selective textures or colors of food, or maybe even just limiting intake to safe food. So there's a lot of different variations of picky eating. Examples of what this can look like would be not eating food that touches each other. That can be pickiness. Not eating anything green. not eating any vegetables, right? Only eating like grains or like potatoes and what we call kind of the white category of plants, right? Or the brown category of plants. It could look like not eating meats because, again, we're going to get into some reasons why that happens, but not eating meats from the texture of it, and not preferring it, right? Just kind of getting to the point where you can't even really put it in your mouth. It could look like a gag reflex from certain textures of maybe even drinks or things that are coming in. It might look like avoiding carbohydrates, right? That's a food group that's often avoided, or even fats, right? It might be that full group of food. So there's a lot of different variations of this, but the whole point is that there is a tendency to be highly selective or restrictive about the foods that one is willing to eat. The causes of picky eating can be highly variable from one person to the next, and each person may have multiple picky categories and things that are avoided, and there may be a different cause for each of those things. So this isn't as like point blank as, oh, there's only one cause and this is true for everyone and it's easy to figure out. It may not be that easy to figure out, but it is helpful to know what the different causes can be, and then start digging into when the food fear or the selectiveness and the pickiness, when did it start? And what is that linked to, right? Because that will help you identify where causes are actually coming from. So one cause is actually genetics, which is interesting. Some research does suggest that genetics can play a role in picky eating. We see that children of parents who are picky eaters are more likely to be picky eaters themselves. And this is a little bit of correlation more than just causation. So it could be conditioning, where if you have a picky eater parent that maybe expressed that pickiness or kind of shared that with you, then you may have that because that's what you were exposed to, right? If you're being told over and over again that something is wrong with certain foods, or that someone doesn't like it, or they don't eat that, like you may not eat that either, or even be exposed to it enough to actually try it enough to know if you like it, right? That can happen a lot. Another cause, which is very common and again, often misunderstood or kind of overlooked, are sensory issues. Some people will have a heightened sensitivity to certain tastes, smells, textures, or temperatures of foods, which can make them difficult to tolerate. Sensory issues can be linked to structural abnormalities, especially with like the tongue and the mouth. Sensory issues can also be linked to the ability to swallow. So again, more of a functional problem with if you have swallowing difficulty or slow peristalsis of the esophagus. That can lead to a sensory link that then again has a cause of that. Taste buds and the development of those. There can actually be damage to certain taste buds and areas of taste in the mouth, and where certain flavors may not be preferred for that reason. And then sensory issues can also be related to what we're going to see as our next cause in a deeper scale, but a bad experience with a certain texture, where maybe, let's say you were eating something a little bit more gooey or mushy, like an okra. If you've ever had okra before, has kind of a gooiness to it. And if you ate it and someone's like, ew, that's worms, or, something like that, that could stick with you and cause, anytime you put that in your mouth, that's what you're thinking about, which can cause this aversion. And this is almost more of a physical manifestation, where it's not just, oh yeah, I can't eat that, but if I try, like you have a visceral kind of physical reaction to it. The next cause is trauma or anxiety. So traumatic experiences with food can definitely contribute to this. This could be linked to choking. A lot of people who've experienced choking to a degree where it was like they needed assistance, or they weren't able to breathe, or they feared being in a place where they wouldn't breathe again, or it wouldn't come out, like that definitely can contribute to picky eating. Or even trauma or an experience like getting sick from food could also contribute to this. Trauma also in general, having a history of trauma and trauma that you're working through, as well as anxiety, whether that's due to trauma or not, those can lead to fears and avoidance of foods. And that can be almost like a fear of the response your body is having to the trauma or anxiety, and the disconnect in your brain and in the signals where that symptom that you're having of maybe nausea or discomfort, kind of that aversion type feeling, which is truly more anxiety, that can be thought to be a signal of not wanting the food, right? And that can cause some of that pickiness. And that may happen from certain types of foods as well, or happen in certain environments. And then that's translated to, oh, I don't eat that food, or I don't like that food. Another cause are developmental stages. And so this one is a cause that can change and something that we all sort of experience in our own ways. We know that picky eating is common among young children as they both explore new foods and they're developing their taste buds. So they're developing taste and even exposure to foods. It can also be related to children gaining their independence as they get older. So even asserting independence and choice can lead to picky eating, not even for a true reason to avoid the food, but just to be able to say, no, I'm not eating that. And we can see that often where kids love something and then all of a sudden, no, I will not eat that. And that could be colors of foods of like, no, I will not eat green foods or I will not eat vegetables, right? Because they're trying to test out their ability to make a choice of what they do. And so that typically will get better and shift, but that's what that would be linked to. We do know, though, that some children, this picky eating can actually persist into adulthood or even adolescence or teens. And this is where we typically should be getting concerned. Oftentimes we'll overlook it. Again, it's not talked about enough, but this can even be where digestive issues have been missed in kids, where they've experienced symptoms tied to a food. And we just say, oh, they're just being picky, they'll grow out of it. And they don't. Or there's a sensory problem, like a motor issue, where maybe they aren't swallowing well, or there is an abnormality with their mouth and they're not able to chew and move the food around properly, right? That's a problem. And that can lead to increased food fear in adulthood, but also missing nutrition if depending on the severity of the restriction that is a result of the pickiness, right? And then another common cause that we see mostly in adulthood, teens into adulthood, would be the input of others and information. This can be misinformation or it could be actually good information, but this is where you are avoiding things due to a perceived either benefit or risk involved, right? And so this is where dieting and diet culture comes into play, where if all you hear are carbs are bad for you, carbs are bad for you, carbs are bad for you, then there may be a pickiness now to carbs where now those are restricted because of the perceived value in avoiding them, right? Sugar is one that's really big. That can also be true for like IBS management, right? Where if you hear FODMAPs are bad for IBS, FODMAPs are bad for IBS, then you may be really picky about your food and avoiding FODMAPs because you're trying to control your symptoms. So again, this could be one that it's a fine line between the intention and application of that information and whether that information is actually solid. So understanding, is this information actually true? Is this beneficial to me? And then how am I working this out? What does the application look like to where this is a healthy place and not a place where now I'm crippled in fear or overwhelmed or anxious or missing out on the nutrition that my body needs to function, develop, and grow and, progress through life, right? That's the clear line that we're looking for. And that can even happen again in kids too. That's not something that only happens in adults because that information can come from a lot of places, even peer pressure of, ew, that's gross, about certain foods. And now the kid is avoiding that food at all costs because their friends told them it was gross. So they have this perceived risk, right? Of like, if I eat that, that's gross, I'm gross. And that can kind of lead to further issues, right? With those foods. It can definitely affect the subconscious and the choice that we may not even realize. When we're looking at the effects of picky eating, the effects that are present do depend on the severity of the pickiness and what's being avoided. That is very true because it's not always going to be the same. If pickiness really is just about food touching, right? But you're able to separate the foods and eat the foods, that's very different than avoiding all fruits and vegetables or certain textures, like avoiding, anything that is starchy. because of the texture, or avoiding all proteins, right? That's going to impact nutrition quality. That's where we will see the impact of limited nutrition and nutrient intake, which could increase the risk of nutritional deficiencies, which can then have further issues. And the biggest risk that we see would be social isolation and anxiety. Oftentimes, pickiness is not just about this clear, like, oh no, I don't really like that, I like this instead, and then we move on. Pickiness is something that is, to a certain degree, can be rooted in, again, fear and anxiety, right? Because either there's this past experience or a very strong preference, or a perceived, again, benefit or risk involved with the situation. And that can create more anxiety and food anxiety around what you're doing and eating. And then social isolation, if you're constantly thinking about, okay, I can't have this, I can't have this, and you have a lot of restrictions in place, it can be really challenging to engage in social interactions where food is involved, because those needs that you have based on the pickiness that's there could interfere with your ability to actually enjoy food around others. Those who deal with pickiness as they get older may also have some kind of guilt and shame around it, because they may feel embarrassed of like, oh, I'm really needy, or I'm high maintenance, or I have, a lot of needs. And so I'm not going to let anyone cook for me, or I'm not going to go to this event, or like, I don't want to eat out because I'm going to have to ask about all the ingredients. And, it can really impact your social life and your relationships, because a lot of our relationships are centered around food. That's where we typically do connect for family, for friends, even in work environments. Networking can happen oftentimes around food. And so that's a huge piece. Now for a quick word from our sponsor, Fodzyme. Do you miss eating a big bowl of your favorite pasta, or biting into a juicy, wonderful, loaded burrito without the dreaded gut symptoms after? Fodzyme makes it possible for you to enjoy your favorite FODMAP-filled meals again. Fodzyme can help you reduce your overall FODMAP intake, support better digestion, and enable you to eat and enjoy a more diverse and nutritious diet. Fodzyme works by targeting FODMAPs directly. There are 3 specialized enzymes break down FODMAPs before they can even trigger symptoms to begin with, which helps you feel your best during and after the meal. Unlike capsules, Fodzyme's unique powder form actually supports maximum integration with your trigger foods, mixing in with the food before you even take a bite. This means that the enzymes start working their magic before you even start eating. Plus, there are no other additives or triggers that you have to worry about. You can learn more about Fodzyme and try it for yourself at fodzyme.com. Use code GUTSHOW for 20% off your order. That's FODZYME.com and GUTSHOW for 20% off. You can also find all of the details in show notes. Now let's get back to the episode. Okay, so let's shift gears just a little bit, or take a step back, and talk a bit about how taste is actually developed, because you may be thinking, and this is a very common piece, this is kind of smaller, it's more mild on this scale of picky eating, but it's related to, I don't like that. that statement of, I don't like that. I don't like those flavors. I don't like it. I don't like the textures. I don't like it. And knowing how taste is developed and ways to kind of adjust that and work with that can help you increase exposure to foods and kind of challenge your own, I don't like that thoughts, which will help you kind of weed through potential causes of the pickiness that you have in place. Because it can be tricky to, as you get older, especially differentiate between, do I just not like it? Or is there like a sensory thing going on? Is there a phobia? Is there a fear going on? Is something else blocking my ability to try this? Because most of us as adults, we can usually muster up the will to try something, even if we don't like it, right? But ideally, we want to expose ourselves enough to develop a taste for something, which definitely can happen. So how is taste actually developed? There's a combination of both genetic and environmental factors that can interact or play a role. For genetics, research shows that individuals have different taste receptors and levels of sensitivity to different taste. For example, some people may be more sensitive to bitter taste, while others may be more sensitive to sweet taste. And this is where we see people who are drawn to like sweet versus savory, right? That's an example. Or some people who love bitterness and some people who absolutely do not. Some people who can handle and actually taste like spiciness and what we call umami, or like that deep, rich flavor. Some people can't. Another great example of this would be cilantro. That's one that's often talked about, where some people will taste cilantro and they will taste soap, whereas some people taste cilantro and they love it. That may be more of a genetic piece and taste receptors that are playing a role there in determining your experience with a flavor. The genetic piece may be altered, because we can alter taste a little bit, but some of that may not. So that's one that doesn't necessarily shift and change that much. And that would be something where, family members are similar, or it's kind of been around forever, in having conversations with people like, what do you taste whenever you taste this? Or what do you experience with this meal or this dish? That'll help you kind of weed through like, oh, like what am I tasting more of or drawn to, or what's sticking out for me the most in this meal? And that may link back to genetics and your taste receptors. Another influence, which is one of the biggest, are early experiences. Early experiences with food, especially in childhood, can shape our preferences for different flavors as well as different textures. Studies have shown that babies who are exposed to a variety of flavors in breast milk from a varied diet of the mom and solid foods, so what they're fed as they introduce foods, may be more accepting of foods later in life. So early exposure to a variety of flavors and textures can actually lead to more acceptance of new foods later. We also know that children who are repeatedly exposed to a food are more likely to develop a liking for it. Preference and acceptance of a new food likely will not happen on one exposure. So with children, whenever food is being introduced, especially different colors and textures, the goal is to simply expose them a little bit at a time before asking them to actually taste it. You don't want to just stick a food in a kid's face and say, hey, try this. Not all kids are going to respond well to that, nor may they actually be ready for that, right? They may have a bad experience with that food that's hard to recover from. But even putting like a little piece of broccoli on the plate with the foods that they already like, putting another little piece, and just continuing to expose them to those foods, eating those foods around kids, that can actually increase their acceptance of that food and then lead to a preference for it. Flavors and tastes are the same way. Whenever we are introducing foods, even to kids in feeding therapy, adults in feeding therapy, they may recommend you smell it, and that's the first exposure. The second exposure is to, touch it, with the hand and feel around. That may be the second. The third may be licking it versus like actually biting it, putting it down. Then you may take a small bite and then put it down. Like it's a very small, slow exposure, knowing that the first experience with the food is not going to be the end all and what you experience forever, right? You may have to expose yourself in different ways in order to then tolerate it and accept it. And early childhood experiences of that are one of the biggest determinants of what you're accepting of as an adult. Another influence would be cultural influences. The foods that are available and commonly eaten in one culture can influence taste preferences. For example, people who grow up in cultures that eat spicy or bitter foods more frequently may have a greater tolerance and preference for those flavors. You see this a lot where people move to maybe a different country or in a different cultural area, and it's food that they haven't been exposed to, that they may be really averse from, of like, oh, I don't like that, I don't want that. But then once they start to, again, be exposed to it and eat it and be around it, then they start to develop more of a taste for it. And then even going back to where they originally were from and the culture that they grew up in, now they may not be having, like, they may not have a preference or be kind of tolerable or be adjusted to those flavors that they grew up and used to love, right? We know that cultural influence makes a huge difference. And that's why even kids in different cultures will go for different things, right? And they'll eat different things, whereas a kid in one culture may not even touch what a kid in a different culture is eating because of where they grew up, the influences and what they're exposed to. And then another one is learning and conditioning. And this is going to be what we see as we progress through life. linked a lot to the early experiences, but we do know that our taste preferences can be shaped by learning and conditioning. So for example, if we associate a certain food with a positive experience, like eating ice cream after a big event or a successful day, then we may develop a liking for that food. And so just like we do with positive reinforcement, this can be true of food as well, or even having a food in a food that we like or paired with a food that we like, that can help us develop this positive experience with and this positive association with that food. So an example there would be if you really don't like strawberries and you have not eaten strawberries in a very long time and you're trying to introduce them, but you love chocolate, maybe you do chocolate drizzled over or like a chocolate dipped strawberry, right? That's an example. Maybe it is broccoli, right? Or vegetables, but you love pasta sauce, like a tomato sauce. You can chop up the broccoli and put it in the pasta sauce. And that's a way to have a positive association with that food. So that's another way to do it, or an example. It is really important to expose yourself to a variety of foods as a child, also as an adult, as you continue to grow and experience life, right? As you continue to develop, we're always developing. That will help expand food choices and taste preferences. Research shows that it can take up to 10 to 15 exposures to a new food before a child may accept it. That may be a little less for an adult, especially if you were exposed to that food previously, but it will take time. And I can see this really often in my IBS patients and those with digestive disorders, even with food fears, that having those like small, gradual, consistent exposures can actually lead to a successful reintroduction of a food. So it's really important to make sure that you are incorporating food more frequently than just, one time. And if you do try something, you're like, no, I definitely don't like it. If you're trying to challenge some of your pickiness, try to put it in a different format if you need to. Cut it up differently. Continue to expose yourself and at least give yourself 10 times before you determine, oh, I don't like it. And again, if you're then exposing yourself and every time you try to eat that food, there's a strong aversion to it, then you need to ask yourself, where is that aversion linked? Is it more fear and anxiety, or is it more of a physical, I can't eat it? And it's going to be really hard to determine the two. That's where honestly therapy can be so helpful to really dig into that. But if you are noticing that it's more food fear, and that's going to usually be linked to perceived value of the food or a perceived reaction, right? So that's where in digestive disorders, it's not necessarily the food itself, but it's well, I may have symptoms from that food. I don't know. I haven't had that food. Maybe it's going to cause a flare. I think it caused a flare last time. Then you know that that's what you want to work on. And that's going to be related to that food fear, related to the health condition. If it's, I'm afraid that if I eat this food, I'm going to gain weight, or I'm afraid that if I eat this food, I'm going to be unhealthy, or I'm afraid if I eat this food, if it's more linked to this input and information that you've gathered from others in some way, then that would be something to work through. And you want to work through that input and that information. And again, therapy is so beneficial for that. Like someone to guide you through that can be really helpful. Now, if you do notice more of the aversion linked to a sensory thing or a problem with the function, right? More of that physical reaction. So you can link back to, well, whenever I eat that food, I feel like I'm choking, or it's hard for me to chew that food up, or I did experience choking in the past. Maybe, something happened, or I feel like there's something wrong. I don't process it well. I can't like chew it well. I can't even put it in my mouth. If that's where you're at, feeding therapy is actually a really great option that, again, isn't utilized enough, but it can be an effective way to address picky eating patterns, both in children and in adults, especially if you link it back to like, oh, well, I've never just been able to eat this food. That may be a sign that, oh, maybe you could have used feeding therapy as a kid, and it's okay to explore that now, even as an adult. Feeding therapy involves working with a trained healthcare professional, usually a speech language pathologist or a occupational therapist that is specialized in feeding therapy, to help you develop healthy eating habits and expand your range of food choices. So where this can help and kind of what feeding therapy can address would be underlying factors like your sensory sensitivities, maybe oral motor difficulties, even anxiety or even medical conditions. Like they may be able to address that. They're going to help you with that gradual exposure. So giving you that safe and supportive environment for the exposure of new foods, including the small, non-threatening portions, and then gradually increasing as you're comfortable. So even just providing that safety. They can provide positive reinforcement and reward systems to help you try new foods and develop those healthy habits if you're not able to do that on your own. They can give you oral motor exercises. So that is going to help you develop the skills to chew properly and swallow properly. And that's really helpful if you have a hard time chewing and swallowing, and that's something that you've experienced, especially if there's another reason for that. Like if you have lost teeth, that could be a big one, or there's been damage to the mouth in some way that has then impacted your ability to chew and swallow. They can help you bring family into it if you need to, if that's a big piece. That's usually going to be more involved with kiddos, but that will be available for kind of educating and supporting the goals at home, so that becomes a safe environment. And then they can also help with behavioral intervention. So that could include some problematic eating behaviors and help you kind of develop more of a positive association with food. Feeding therapy is not going to address things like eating disorders and that level of food fear, but it can provide safety and an environment to explore those things. There are some common conditions that can be mistaken for picky eating and can kind of mimic just pickiness. And that can include sensory processing disorder. It's a condition where the brain has a difficulty receiving and responding to information from the senses. And so that can lead to an aversion to textures, tastes, and smells of food, including some picky eating patterns. And that could also be related to other sensory issues. So that could be not letting the food touch, but also like sensory issues with like clothing or anything, right? If there's certain textures on your body, those could be signs of a sensory processing disorder. Autism spectrum disorder. Those with autism do have sensory sensitivities that can impact eating habits. And that's something that, again, can show up in different ways and will often be missed in childhood, but could be missed into adulthood as well, especially if someone's kind of on the more mild form of the spectrum. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. This is more so related to the struggle with impulsivity and poor self-regulation, which can lead to kind of erratic and picky eating patterns that need to be more kind of put into a routine. Anxiety disorders, like we already mentioned, anxiety can definitely be a cause of picky eating. And if the anxiety is the main trigger, anxiety needs to be addressed and maybe treated separately. And that can resolve some of the picky eating versus just trying to address the eating. We know that a lot of gastrointestinal disorders and conditions can do that. So that could be acid reflux, celiac disease, IBD, IBS. If you have discomfort or pain after eating, that can lead to a strong aversion to foods. And oftentimes we will need to have tools for symptoms. That's what we do with our clients in practice, is we help them work through how to support their body to decrease symptoms, but also, how to know what's contributing to symptoms and how to better understand that so that they can feel more confident with introducing new foods and exploring the introduction of new foods, which is really important. And then also eating disorders. So selective eating can be an eating disorder in disguise, where it's like, oh no, I don't like that. But in reality, there's something else fueling it. And there's two kind of sets of eating disorders, some that are more aesthetic based, which is what we see with anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder. There may be this desire to be thin or that kind of disconnect to the body. And so that is where a lot of the restriction will be linked to not wanting to gain weight typically. And then we also have avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And this is ARFID. It's seen a lot in GI conditions where there's a food fear. And so it's really more about the food will make me sick, or sometimes we'll see this too with like the desire to be healthy, right? Where it's like, well, if I eat this, I won't be healthy. Not necessarily this idea of being thinner or a certain body shape or size, right? It's less about aesthetics and more about a fear linked to kind of a health condition or something that's going on in the body. if any of these conditions are present, they're all going to be treated differently. And this is something that, again, therapists that are well versed in this area, or even psychologists, they can help with this and help kind of work through, okay, what else is going on here? If you notice that picky eating has gone beyond just a little bit of, preference and is now a bit more debilitating, where it's truly impacting your day-to-day life, it's impacting your social life, it's impacting even your nutrition, that's a sign that we need to figure out what is contributing to this, because there is a way through it. You don't have to be in that forever. Picky eating is not your entire identity, right? And it's not something that you're stuck with forever. There is a way to kind of work through it. And the only case where that's not true are with allergies, and that's not picky eating. That's managing a health condition, right? Even limiting foods for your symptoms, that's managing a health condition. That's not just picky eating. But if you do realize, like, I don't actually know the true reason for this or what I'm doing here, I'm not challenging this to truly see if this is working or not for me, and it's actually causing a strain in different parts of my life, those are your red flags that there's more to address, right? There's something to dig into there, and there's freedom, right, to be found on the other side, which is really beneficial. There's no judgment from being in that place. And so if you are there and you're like, oh gosh, like I'm seeing all of that, it's not always this conscious choice. And so it's not just about, oh, you need to, just eat the food. Like, there are some ways to kind of structure those introductions, which again can be done through feeding therapies, registered dietitians that work in the space. Like, we can help with that. I help with that, and my team helps with that in the space of digestive disorders. But it's okay to seek out help in order to, again, have a safe and supportive environment, and also just guidance and accountability as you're working through that process, because it's going to take time. Pickiness is not resolved in one bite. It's not resolved overnight. It takes time, and it may not also be resolved right away. It may take kind of some messiness in figuring out what all is going on. Hope this was a helpful conversation. I hope that this sparked maybe some different perspectives or thoughts on pickiness that maybe you haven't thought about before. And like I said at the very start, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd love to hear your experiences, your your opinions or takeaways. And so you can share those on social media, either through Instagram or even our Facebook group. All of that is linked in show notes for you if you would like to share that. But thank you for being part of this season. Thank you for showing up and listening to these episodes. I can't wait for whatever next season has in store. You can follow us on social media, or make sure you're on our email list and you're getting our emails if you want to be the first one to know. You can also, I think, subscribe to our show in any way, and that can give you the details as we bring out more episodes. But thank you again. And with that, we close down season 5. Are you struggling with frustrating GI symptoms, gut issues, or maybe even IBS, and you really need support and guidance from a well-trained, qualified professional? If that is you, the Gutivate team of dietitians may be exactly what you are looking for. We personalize every plan for our clients based on their assessment, their medical history, and what actually is working or not working in their body. We do this through close follow-ups every 2 to 3 weeks, all virtual. We also do weekly check-ins on every single client, and we are available for our clients through email and messaging support throughout the week in their entire program. Imagine this to be that hand-in-hand care that helps you reach your goals more efficiently, but also with more confidence and knowledge that you can use throughout the rest of your life. If that is what you are looking for, you can start with a consult call where we can talk a bit more about your history, what you're looking for, what you need, and if we can help. You can find the link to schedule a consult call in the show notes if you are interested. We can't wait to talk to you, and we hope to work with you to help you reach your goals.